Before I start, I have a small disclaimer. A lot of the presentations have visual aids and stuff, but I'm going to be my own personal visual aid because I talk about injuries today and I have a concussion. So I have some just kind of, the struggles of having a concussion, memory, balance, things like that. So I'm just going to give that little disclaimer before I get started. Okay. So, 1 Corinthians says, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God?" Our bodies are one of the most beautifully complex things God has ever created. And these amazing things allow us to run miles and climb mountains and do incredible things. So it is very much vital that we protect them. When I was a kid, I loved playing around in the backyard with my family. Sometimes I'd be running so fast to get to the next base and kickball that I would fall and scrape my knee. I would get bandaged up by my parents, and in 2 days you would have never known that scrape was there. I would roll my ankle trying to hit a ball in tennis, and I would cry and cry because to me, how could a pain like that ever go away? But it did. I got back up, walked it off, and was able to keep going. Unless you're a Robert Downey Jr., you are not invincible. You cannot call a suit of armor to come and protect you every time you need it, so injuries are basically inevitable. But our bodies go about healing our injuries in magnificent ways, and that is what I chose to try and use this capstone to study. For athletes specifically, injuries become more crushing than losses. Injury prevention, rehabilitation can keep athletes from suffering a career-ending injury. My goal this year was to further my understanding around injury prevention, learn how our body is able to heal the way that it does, and how aspects of medicine can aid our bodies in recovery. As I started this project, I looked back over the past 18 years of my life, and I realized that throughout my whole life, some kind of sport has always been at the center of it. My favorite thing in the world is being an athlete, but being an athlete comes with injuries. My first big injury was when I was 4. I broke my arm falling off the monkey bars. When I was in 5th grade, I broke my foot. My first sports-related injury was my sophomore year of high school. I sprained my ankle for the very first time, and for me, it was not going to be the last. I am not invincible, even though I wish I was, and sometimes like to think that I am. I remember coming off the field that day, and one of our soccer coaches, who is now a physical therapist, she checked me out and made sure that my ankle wasn't broken, and basically just confirmed that it was just a mild sprain. She helped me kind of walk it off, and she asked me if I thought that if she taped it up, I would be able to continue playing and have some support. For me, all I wanted to do was go back and keep playing, so I was like, go for it, tape it, do whatever you have to do, as long as I can keep playing. Obviously, the tape didn't heal my ankle. I still had some significant pain, some severe swelling, and things like that. But I was at least allowed to keep playing. Those were one of the first few moments that I could feel myself being drawn to this topic and just drawn to sports medicine in general. Over time and throughout high school, I've spent a lot of time with trainers, getting my ankles taped and things like that. And I've learned a lot about injury prevention and rehabilitation. I began to love growing to help people heal and how athletes can be affected by injuries and how they get better once they get hurt. I'm probably an athletic trainer's least favorite patient because of the questions that I bombard them with every single time they try and tape my ankle. My passion for sports medicine came from physical pain in my life, and I was able to continue to do the things that I loved because of the ways that I had learned how to take care of my body. Whether it was an ankle tape that gave me more support when I ran and would protect my bones and ligaments from eventually tearing when I would sprain my ankle again, or if it was strips of KT tape put in a specific place could relieve pain and help an athlete perform at a better level. It was magical to me, and my fascination for it grew each day. One of the biggest things I wanted to learn from my capstone was the impact of injuries on athletes and on the body. This year, I read a book called Built from Broken by Scott Hogan. Scott Hogan is a licensed athletic trainer, and in this book, he goes through the ways in which the body reacts to pain and the ways of preventing injuries. In a chapter of his book called The Anatomy of Pain, Hogan says that pain serves as a neurological reminder of what you shouldn't be doing, and that neurological reminder is what protects us from injuries and re-injuries. When it comes to pain, there are 2 types: nociceptive pain and neuropathic pain. The pain you feel when you break a bone is nociceptive pain, and neuropathic pain is the shooting and tingling pain that you get in other injuries. Understanding pain is the first part in learning how to treat an injury, and is something I found gets overlooked. But when you really think about it, you can't treat a broken bone the same way you would treat nerve damage. In chapter 9 of Hogan's book, he begins to dive into injury recovery. Injury recovery is a progression, he says, and it starts with stability. The idea is that the exercises that establish baseline stability will help you return your joints to basic positioning, which will help your injury recovery. The second progression is movement mechanics. Movement mechanics is the establishment of motor patterns that your body needs to move at a basic level. Eventually, you move on to increased mobility of the injured area, and that's what helps get your body back to doing what it was before the injury occurred. The mobility exercises are the basics for human movement, and as silly as it sounds, it's the simple things that are actually crucial to injury recovery. Once stability, form, and mobility are sufficient, then you move on to being able to strengthen. The strengthening portion is the part in which makes the injury able to return to the motions and movements you wish to continue after your injury. What might actually be the most important step is what Hogan refers to in this chapter as endurance. Endurance is what keeps the injury from becoming re-injured. Just because an injury is healed doesn't mean you can forget about the mobility and the strengthening that was a part of the recovery process. Exercises that are designed to increase movement and provide that strength are meant to be continued throughout your time. Otherwise, the injury can become re-injured. You can end up right back in the same spot if you don't take care of that injury in the correct way. Now, these are the basics, and there are obviously going to be different ways of treating injuries, and there are much more complex aspects. Also, people's bodies don't heal in the same way. But the basics are still important, and they're the big ideas that prevent injuries and help you heal from injuries to begin with. For athletes, these are the things that make it or break it. An athlete who doesn't take care of a minor injury can become an athlete who has to sit out a couple of weeks because their minor injury became something much bigger and they didn't know how to properly treat it, or they didn't take the necessary steps that it took to regain mobility and strengthen, and the injury came back. As well as my book, I also shadowed a personal trainer at Anytime Fitness. She walked me through a bunch of different exercises that work different parts of the body that can be used to strengthen or used to create mobility as a whole. She developed exercises, regimens based on what her client needed, whether that was focusing on body weight squats or weighted squats that would build muscle in the legs as opposed to the weighted squats that would improve movement in the hips. She taught me many ways that I can strengthen my own ankle just by strengthening my hips or working with my calves. I think what she does for people is pretty incredible because she not only helps people recover from their injuries, but also prevents them in the future. It was also exciting for me to see how life-giving this job is for her and that hopefully it will be for me in the future. In an interview with a close family friend, we talked about her job as an occupational therapist. She talked about how her favorite part of her job is seeing her patients who have suffered these tough injuries get back to doing the things like work or school or just making an overall big comeback from the injuries. She explained how her patients set goals for their recovery, and when they are able to achieve those goals, it was rewarding not just for the patients, but also for her. Tiffany Heck has been an occupational therapist at Craig Hospital for 27 years, and in my conversations with her, I could feel her love and care for her patients and for her job. I thought a lot of her when continuing this project, as well as looking into my future. I hope to be able to help heal and love on people in the way that she has done every day. There was a day where Mr. Spector came to talk to our senior seminar class about what it means to pursue a career where you can do what you love. In his lecture, he talked about how the job we choose should be something that is financially stable, internally fulfilling, while also being kingdom-oriented. Something in this capstone that I was struggling with was I didn't know what to do for an experience. I didn't know of anything that didn't require a few weeks prep, multiple tests, or a vaccine, seeing that my capstone revolves mostly around medicine. As Spector talked about these 3 pillars, I thought about how I wanted to find that in my life and how I hoped to be able to do what I truly loved and why I truly loved it. I had somewhat of a light bulb moment, and I figured a good way for me to do that and to show the impact of injuries, as well as my sports medicine fascination, would be to talk to the people who had experienced an injury that impacted their life sufficiently while playing high school sports. I decided I wanted to interview 4 different FRCS students who have experienced injuries during their time playing high school sports here. And I wanted to learn how those injuries impacted their lives. My friend Ben broke his ankle playing football. Aiden sprained his ankle playing basketball. And Tara tore her calf in a basketball game as well. Colin also ruptured his ACL playing basketball. In my conversations with Aiden, he said something that I had never really thought of. He said, "There's a chance that if I would have been more intentional about stretching, I may have been able to prevent my injury." Because of his injury, he made sure that stretching was a priority in his pregame routine. Aiden's recovery was something that I had never really considered, and his healing process and rehabilitation was provided by a bunch of different doctors that he had seen and had been able to show him stretches and exercises that helped him strengthen and build the muscles in his ankle so he could go back to playing basketball. Tara, a former student here, experienced many of the same things as Aiden. What Aiden and Tara had to find in their recovery is a balance between healing while also being able to rehabilitate. In physical therapy, they both found exercises that worked for them in their process, but their healing process was different than Ben and Colin's. Ben and Colin sustained much more intense injuries. However, in order to return to their game, they needed the help of hardwares or surgeries. Most importantly, they needed to heal before they could even begin rehabilitation. Obviously, what all of these injuries had in common was that they all occurred while playing a sport that they had loved. And through the entire process, whether it was 6 weeks or 6 months or 9 months, each would do whatever it took to get back to where they wanted to be. Every time an athlete steps onto the field or onto the court, they put themselves at risk for getting hurt. Ben didn't know his last game would be his last game when he stepped on the field that day. Aiden didn't think that the end of his season would come before the rest of his teammates. It seems backwards that the thing that they all loved was actually the thing that ultimately ended up hurting them. The hardest thing about being an athlete and being hurt is realizing that you are not invincible and rest is going to be your best chance to heal. When I sprained my ankle last semester, I went to the Swedish emergency room and had x-rays of my left ankle. The x-rays showed that there was no breaks or dislocations, but showed a pretty severe ligamentous injury and some significant tissue swelling. Ice elevation and rest were the best treatments to help heal my ankle, but being told I had to sit out and not be a part of my game or my team was something that was not an easy thing for me to hear, and I only missed 2 weeks. That feeling was unanimous amongst the people that I had talked to. Not only did I learn the ways that Aiden strengthened his ankle or the screws that Ben had put in his leg, but I also learned that an athletic injury hurts more than the physical pain. It really can feel like your body is failing you, but the 4 people I talked to showed exceptional patience, powerful perseverance, and dedication. They took the time to heal and listen to the doctors that they had seen and continue to be a part of their team. Athletes are very gifted, and they are truly remarkable in the ways that they are able to perform with their bodies. And sports can bring so much joy to the people who participate in them. In my conversations with Ben, Aiden, Tara, and Colin, it is so clear that injuries are truly heartbreaking. And I believe that is why I have come to care so deeply for this type of medicine and the medicine that surrounds sports. I think it's something that we don't really see a lot, or we don't really focus on. Athletes tend to want to push through and play through an injury because what an injury does is it takes an athlete out of their game, away from their team, and detaches them from a significant part of who they are. I realize that injuries hurt an athlete's heart more than they do the physical body. Obviously, not all injuries occur in the same way, and they are different natures. Ben's broken leg was an accident, and there wasn't a whole lot he could have done to prevent that. However, the process of rehabilitation that he went through was just as similar. He wanted to get back to playing basketball, and he now is, and he's actually back better or sooner than he was actually predicted. With that being said, he didn't come back full strength right away. His return was just as much of a progression as those of Aiden and Tara. The big difference was Aiden and Tara suffered injuries that maybe could have been prevented. back in November when I sprained my ankle. It was one of the worst sprains that I had ever had. But what I learned was that I should have taken the time 3 years ago to heal and strengthen my ankle, and I maybe would have been able to prevent my injury now, or my injury then, from taking so long to heal.